Hey guys, Trevor Chakouti here from SpineWise, and if you're someone who suffers with fatigue, or if you've ever had an interest in knowing what it is about diet that makes it really important to be eating a certain way, or perhaps you're having issues in other areas of your health such as your sleep, your energy levels, or anything else as broad as possibly can be, this biochemical pathway may be the most important thing in your life. Before we get into it though, if you're new to the videos, please comment below. Always great to know that I'm talking to somebody, and always great to know that we're interacting with you guys and getting information you need. Don't forget to like our page as well as we get more information out, and like always, if you have any questions at all, just post them up as we go. So anyway, today what I want to talk about is the Krebs cycle, which is one of the most important functions in terms of producing energy. It's one of the most critical pathways in the human body. Alright, so the Krebs cycle really is a cycle, as it says, a big circle. And this whole process of this pathway is to produce a substance known as ATP, which is what we commonly call energy. But the actual clinical term is something known as ATP. The reason this pathway is so important though is because of the other things that come from it, which are so critical for human health. So to start with, when we look at our cycle here, there's a whole lot of different pathways that come from it. Most importantly, off the side here, there's a substance called alpha-ketoglutarate. And this pathway, this biochemical substance is really, really key because it picks up ammonia and goes on to form something known as glutamate. My screen's going a bit haywire there, but it picks up a substance called glutamate. And glutamate really is what keeps your head clear. It's what allows your brain to stay happy, allows you to keep your arousal rates up, allows you to maintain focus. It's a really important hormone in doing that. A really important substance, I should say, not hormone in doing that. But glutamate is also important because it combines with three things. That's glutamate, glycine, and cysteine to form a substance known as glutathione. And glutathione is one of our key antioxidants in the human body. It's responsible for removing heavy metals, reducing free radicals, and also keeping the liver healthy itself. So it's a really, really key substance. There's been a lot of good research of late on it, on a whole variety of different conditions. The key step from that is our glutamate. Now, glutamate also is broken up into form two substances. One is called glycine, and the other is called GABA. And the reason these two things are important is these are the two substances that calm the body down. So glycine deficiencies are commonly been associated with cramping in athletes and things like that, where GABA is the main thing that calms the brain down and allows you to sleep at night. So these are two critical things, and the ironic thing is that both of those are derived again from glutamate, which is our wind-up system, a system that actually gets us up and going, and all this is derived from our Krebs cycle pathways from which alpha-ketoglutarate is produced. So how do we get into the Krebs cycle? What is the start of it? How do we actually get to the beginning process of it? Well, the way it basically works is there's two ways in. And basically the main thing you're trying to produce is a substance known as acetyl-CoA. And the reason this is important is this is our entry. This is the product we need to walk into our Krebs cycle to start that entire process off. And the good thing about acetyl-CoA is you actually have two separate ways of producing it. One of them is from fat through a process known as beta oxidation, and the other one is from glucose. Now, when we all think of glucose, we all think of sugar and we think of carbohydrate and all that, but glucose is actually derived from two different substances that we consume. One is protein and the other is our carbohydrate. So both of these go on to produce glucose when they get into the bloodstream, which the body then eventually converts to acetyl-CoA amongst a lot of other things, which we use to spin our Krebs cycle to produce glutamate, energy, all that other stuff we spoke about before. The other way beta oxidation is from fat, and particularly tends to be from saturated fat. So we all talk about saturated fat as being and I'm being very, very simplified here, but we talk about it as being a negative thing, but it's not actually just as bad as what people make it out to be. And you can look at my videos on our site that goes through all that and why saturated fat isn't such a bad thing. But when we look at this process, glucose has one problem. We're converting glucose across to acetyl-CoA, and there's an intermediate step there called pyruvate. It produces a substance known as lactic acid. And the problem with lactic acid is that when we start elevating our levels of lactic acid in the body, Yes, you're probably thinking, hey, I'm an athlete, I run really hard and I get all this muscle soreness, which is lactate. But what we're talking about is systemic lactic acid changes. So this is right across the body. And when we have high amounts or increasing amounts of lactate going right across the body, it tends to acidify the bloodstream. As the body gets more and more and more acidic, there's a ton of different things that have been associated with that, from oxygen changes to inflammatory changes, immune system changes. There's even been some suggestion of cancers being associated with that as well. So there's a really, really important process coming through here. And vitamin B1 is one of the ways that we can kind of stimulate the movement of glucose to acetyl-CoA without having such a dependency on lactic acid. So thiamine pyrophosphate, vitamin B1 is a key marker from that. By the way, when we look at this process, really what we want to be looking at is the ratio of fat coming this way versus glucose coming that way. And what we're starting to understand now is that the predominant pathway that's being used should really be derived from fat rather than from that glucose. It doesn't mean the glucose shouldn't be used, it's just a dependency type thing, and we really want the bulk of it coming from this way here. So if we can increase the movement from fat, that reduces lactic acid, which basically tries to keep us more alkaline. We know that's more in tune with human life, and therefore we tend to have a better outcome. And if we're not spinning our Krebs cycle as effectively as we can, there's a whole lot of things that happen, but one of the big key things is that lack of alpha-ketoglutarate, and the result of that is the reduction in glutamate, which can affect a whole lot of things, from your alertness levels, brain health, detoxification levels, a whole lot of different things. Okay, so where are we from this? What are some key points to take away? So firstly, we need to understand is that fat isn't the enemy, okay? We use fat, we need fat. It's not necessarily the bad guy. I know we talk about it from a cholesterol perspective, but fat and cholesterol aren't directly linked. Our cholesterol that gets into the bloodstream isn't fat. It's what we call a lipoprotein, which is a combination of fat and protein bound together, which is really produced in the liver. So we start talking about cholesterol issues, there's a lot of other things rather than just the fat intake which become important. Exercise is king. We need to stimulate this pathway, and we need to stimulate both the fat pathways and the glucose pathways in order to upregulate energy production. So doing both high intensity and low intensity exercise, what we call aerobic exercise, is really, really important. And as we get older, that need for aerobic activity seems to get higher and higher and higher in most individuals that we see. The other thing to take home is check your pH. You can work out what your pH is very, very simply. All you need to do is check the pH of your saliva. We know saliva pH mimics blood pH quite closely. So looking at your blood pH, and you can do this just with litmus paper or similar, and really what we're looking for is a pH somewhere in the order of around 7.2 to 7.4. And that's roughly where we want to be with our pH. So a simple check of your pH can give you a very, very quick insight as to whether or not you may be having a dependency on one of these pathways. And don't ignore fatigue. Fatigue is a sign that something's not running right. It can just be a simple dietary problem. It can be a Krebs cycle function. There's a lot of different forms of pathology that also create fatigue. So we want to make sure you're never ignoring fatigue, and we want to follow that up. So a couple of things to do. Oh, we've lost our O. Anyway, a couple of things to do. So number one, keep sugar levels low. Keep your diet low in sugar. We can broaden that to say that even keep your carbohydrate intake fairly low. We see a lot of people here who have carbohydrate intakes in the order of 200 to 300 grams a day. That's just way too excessive for most people. Bring that down and you'll find that you'll feel much, much better, and keep away from the refined sweets. We don't want to be pushing this pathway. Stay aerobic. Do the bulk of your exercise as aerobic. You're going to find you feel a whole lot better, especially once you're crossing 40 years of age. That's where it really becomes important. You're not going to recover day to day very effectively. So we want to keep it low. So we want to keep your heart rate low. Start looking at more exercise patterns that are kind of less intensity and more mileage. So start looking at cycling or walking or running or things like that you can do with a low heart rate and ongoing. Sleep is critical, okay? So if we're not getting the sleep, we're going to have greater dependencies on fluctuating blood sugars, which again is going to create stress and going to create dependency on that glucose pathway and really start creating lactate and having issues within our Krebs cycle. And reduce the stress for the exact same reason, okay? So there's a couple bit of insights into the Krebs cycle, and one of the reasons, there's tons of reasons, but just one of the reasons why it's so important to have a healthy Krebs cycle for your brain health, for your liver health, for detoxification, and also why it's so important with diet and all those other things we've spoken about, why it's so important to keep them balanced in order to keep your blood pH and these upper pathways functioning in order to maintain our good health. Anyway guys, if you have any questions at all with that, post them up. Otherwise, if you have any questions for me, just send me a message. My team's always happy to help you in any way, shape or form. Otherwise, I shall catch you in the next vid. Bye for now.